All right, in the fourth tip, we want to talk about this problem. How do you find the angle, the acute angle in a triangle, if you know either it's cotangent, it's secant, or it's cosecant? Now, before we answered this question for the sine, cosine, and tangent, and for the sine, for instance, we said, suppose we know that the sine of the angle theta is 0.35. Then we can find theta by simply taking the inverse sine function, and there's a button on our calculator for that. We have the inverse sine, the inverse cosine, and the inverse tangent available to us right there. The problem is that there is not a button for the inverse cotangent or the inverse secant or the inverse cosecant. So what if we happen to know one of those, the values of one of those functions, we want to find the angle? Well, first of all, just a quick reminder. We said when we first introduced these functions that it's a very good idea to memorize them in this order: sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent, secant, cosecant, because these nested pairs are reciprocals of each other. So in other words, the cosecant is the same as 1 over the sine, or vice versa, the sine is 1 over the cosecant. The secant and the cosine are reciprocals. Secant is 1 over cosine, cosine is 1 over secant, and the same pattern holds true for the tangent. Now, suppose we're given a problem like this one. We know that the cotangent of theta is 0.75. How do we find theta? Well, the trick is really quite easy. All you have to do is take the reciprocal of this. If the cotangent is 0.75, then the tangent must be 1 over 0.75, which is 1 1/3. Then we get out our calculator and we can find the inverse tangent just in the usual way. Inverse tangent of 1.33, a bunch of them, and we come up with about 53.13 degrees. Now, I would like to point out, just before I leave that one example, that I can save myself a little bit of writing here. If I know that the cotangent is 0.75, I can do this all at once. Rather than taking inverse cotangent, I'm going to automatically go to inverse tangent and then take 1 over the cotangent value, which is 0.75. That's what will go inside of the tangent. The argument of the tangent function is simply the reciprocal of the cotangent. Press enter and we get our value there directly. All right, so suppose we want now the inverse secant of 2.21. Well, on the calculator, we would do it this way. You would take the inverse cosine of 1 over that secant value, which is 2.21. And we find that the angle is 63, if we were to round off, 0.10. And finally, suppose that we know that the cosecant is 2, and we would like to be able to find the angle. Well, the trick is this: rather than cosecant, we'll use its reciprocal sine. So find the inverse sine of, instead of 2, we'll do 1/2. However, I think you know this one already, right? The sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. So this should be come out to be 30 degrees, and sure enough, our calculator knows that's 2. So there is how to find the angle if you know the cotangent, secant, or cosecant. You simply take its reciprocal, convert it to tangent, secant, or sine, tangent, cosine, or sine, and then you are ready to use the functions that are built in on your calculator.